If you found this, you probably have a little one that's itchy and uncomfortable, and they and you might be at your wits' end about how to deal with this. Hi, I'm Dr. Cynthia Clark. I'm an acupuncture physician, an applied clinical nutritionist, which is a functional medicine nutritionist. I'm the creator of Energy Evolution, and I'm the president of Longevity Wellness, and I'd like to share a little bit of insight with you about what can cause pediatric urticaria, pediatric eczema, and what you can do about it. Helpful to know that this affects about 20% of the population, both adults and children. And although itchiness is part of the presentation, it's possible that your child might rub more than scratch. If they are scratching, they're very prone to a secondary infection that then becomes the cause of the itchiness. So it's worse when we get to that situation. All right. This is what I find unique about the lens of traditional Chinese medicine. Here we can see we're looking at 11 different causes of itching. So the first one is something that we call wind. And this refers to pathogens that are brought into our field from the outside. So this is when our immune system is low. We might call that the immunoglobulin Qi, or we might call it the Wei Qi in Chinese medicine. That can happen if you don't get enough sleep, if your food is off, if your hydration is off, if you're not pooping. All of these can affect your internal balance and make you more prone to getting sick. That's why some people might get a bug and some people don't. So wind is number one. Damp and hot. These don't have to go together, but it's useful to think of a climate like here in Florida, where it is quite damp and hot. Some people come here with eczema and their skin clears up. Some people, it's worse in a damp, hot climate. What we learn from that is that the internal condition of the body is likely moving in that direction itself. So if this person's skin gets better in a damp, hot environment, they probably have a cold, dry type of eczema. And eating foods and taking herbs that help to warm them and moisten them will help the eczema. If it gets worse in a damp, hot climate, then we need to take some cooling foods and some cooling herbs. That might be things like mint or watermelon. Warming foods are going to be things like cinnamon or chili. Usually it's much more often a hot type of presentation that we see with eczema, so I wouldn't start with chili, the spice. I wouldn't start with that. Deficiency means that we're not getting enough blood flow. Cold will also constrict, although there's more of a pathogenic nature to cold. Stasis means that we've moved further along the spectrum. We aren't just in deficiency, we're cutting off circulation. Generally, we see this in older people. The purple veins that they might have in the ankles are a good presentation of stasis. Toxins. If you've ever seen someone get a bee sting or a wasp sting, you've seen the presentation of toxins. Toxins also show up when we're looking at systemic situations like someone that's really allergic to poison ivy might just have a terrible reaction here. Foods and food sensitivities. Now, this is the one that people are most accustomed to hearing about these days, I find. So there are these great tests, the IgG, the IgE, functional medicine food sensitivity tests. I like those because it helps people see what they need to offload. It doesn't mean that any of those foods are bad. It just means we need to take a little break on those for a while because they're causing some additional inflammation when this little kiddo is already very inflamed. One word about food. From a Western perspective, we tend to see food as protein, carbohydrates, and fats. And we put all of our food into these basic categories. But already you've heard me talking about things like mint and cinnamon, and you get a glimpse that we're talking about some more sophisticated categorizations of foods. So an IgG/IgE test is very helpful to get the full listing. We can also use foods as therapies. So, for example, if we want to moisten this little kiddo, we might choose some apple juice medicinally. Not an everyday thing because all of that fructose can be very hard on a liver, but medicinally it can help restore balance. So we just have to identify in which direction the kiddo is imbalanced. Toxins, by the way, can also include heavy chemicals and heavy metals. So we want to make sure that we're testing for that. Number 10 is worms and parasites. Those can wreak all sorts of havoc. And honestly, more of us have parasites than not, especially kiddos, and especially if you have animals or if any of your children's friends have animals or have had animals. It's very easy to have parasites. And all of those things can contribute to a leaky gut. So it's important that we restore the functioning of the gut, and we also get some of the inflammatory foods out of the diet, and we get the right either topicals or internal supplements to take in order to start correcting that imbalance. But there are a few other specific exacerbators that I want to draw your attention to. Okay, so this one is about certain drugs can cause these conditions of itchiness. Also, certain foods, of course, if your kiddo is allergic to strawberries or shellfish, that's definitely going to do it. But then there are these things like yellow number 5 and azo dyes, and this is where you really want to start reading labels, because you would be astonished how many different foods have non-food things in them. This is an example of benzoic acid foods. Now, I want to be clear to say we're not vilifying foods here. It doesn't mean that any of these are bad in and of themselves. It does mean that there's a time and a place. And if your kiddo has itchy eczema and you take out the benzoic acid foods and it gets better, that means he's probably going to need to go for a little while without having those foods so that the inflammation in his body can calm down. And so can he, and so can you. Other sources of urticaria are infection, internal diseases, physical contact, cold, heat, pressure, and sunlight. So what we do, in some cases, the root cause is what we call the spleen-stomach disharmony. What can cause that? So this is where your gut is out of balance. It can happen due to emotional stress. And kiddos they're very emotional in nature, which is wonderful and beautiful. They are also empathic, and they pick up on the emotions of the people around them too. So they might be picking up on something like planning a move. Things that are it's not that there's anything bad, it's just that there's some stress involved with it. Of course, it can also be food sensitivities, heavy metals, chemicals, and pathogens. So by utilizing appropriate lab tests and muscle testing and accurate Chinese medicine diagnosis, we find the right nutrients and formulas and modalities at the right time to clear pathogens, restore those nutrient deficiencies, and harmonize the body to create resiliency. So I want you to know that there is hope, and we can help, and together we can do this.